everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How is it going? If you are anything like me, today is the Quar anniversary. The anniversary of when you went into quarantine last year. If you remember, March 11th, which is my anniversary with Naomi, that everything shut down that night, and that's when everyone in America started to take it seriously. And here we are, 1 year later, with every day fighting through a brain fog, like Stephen King's The Mist. Hey, you know who actually took coronavirus seriously and now gets to live a normal life? Why, my guest today, Sarah Mary Chadwick. If you don't know who Sarah is, why don't I read you her bio right now. New Zealand-born, Melbourne-based singer-songwriter Sarah Mary Chadwick has been making music since she was a teenager. In the early 2000s, she formed the band Bat Rider in Wellington with guitarist Julia McFarlane, now of Twerps. After a number of albums and lineup changes that left Sarah as the only original member, she began writing music on her own. Her first album as herself, Eating for Two, was released in 2012 on Bedroom Suck Records. And since then, she's released half a dozen albums on labels like Stilt Breeze Records, and her latest, Me and Ennui Are Friends Baby, was just released in February with Bada Bing Records. It's fantastic. I can't recommend Sarah's music enough. And yes, she lives in Australia and is living a normal life while I sit here in my house desperately holding on to the tatters of my mental health. Oh boy, this was a great talk though. Not only is Sarah a great musician, but she is super thoughtful, very interesting. We talk a lot about psychoanalysis and how that's helped her in her childhood, just like very interesting stuff from her childhood and going to boarding school. And I hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, and you want to check out other episodes, you know, you can find at least the last 100 on most apps. I think all of them on things like Spotify. You know, I've done hundreds of interviews with writers and musicians and artists and performers. And you know what I like to do in this beginning part? Just recommend a couple other episodes you might like if you are fans of Sarah's. And recently I've done a ton of really cool interviews with other musicians like Mary Timony from Helium and Francis Quinlan from Hop Along. Ian Mackay's been on the show recently. Thurston Moore. Sam Prekop from Sea and Cake. But I've been doing this show for 11 years. So if you like today's episode, chances are you will find other episodes to be very enjoyable. Even if you don't know the people. I talked to drummer and composer Bobby Previtt just last week, who is very well known in, I guess, like experimental circles and New York downtown jazz scene circles and composery circles. But even if you're not a fan of that, his story is super interesting and he's a super cool dude, and I would very much recommend checking out his episode. But if you like what you hear and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon, Google. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. And I think that's about it. I got some great episodes coming up, including Jamie Stewart from Shoo Shoo, the lads from Chavez, Bob Nastanovich from Pavement, Tobin Sprout of Guided by Voices, and a lot of other great episodes. So look out for those. But for now, let's talk to Sarah. I think it was your new album. I don't know. Some of your music came across my brain at a time when I think my my midlife crisis is just listening to a lot of the indie rock from when I was a teenager, which is not bad.
Yeah,
That's a
okay.
pretty good. I would say that when it comes to midlife crises, if you got to have one,
how old are you?
41.
41. Okay, yep.
So I gotta say,
Right.
pretty pretty good, right? I'm not like buying weird sports cars or like dating 10-year-olds or whatever Woody Allen.
Is
But like,
41 really midlife crisis?
I mean, fingers crossed. I'm still going up the hill, and I'm
Yeah,
not.
I feel like it's like a 50-55.
Oh, I'd love. Hey, if that's well, then awesome. But then I have to look. Then I don't. I don't. I would rather this be the midlife crisis, and it's just like I'm listening to the Lemonheads or whatever, and not that crazy stuff that crazy stuff will happen in 15 years. But anyway, your I think it was like either your last album or your new one just came across my brain, and it got me out of that rut. And so I'm very thankful that
Okay,
you
cool.
that your music was able to pull my spirit out of a hole it had dug for itself.
I know what you mean though. If you're feeling like an old cunt, it does make you feel better to find new things that you like and feel like somewhat relevant in the world.
And I gotta say, I listen to tons of new music. I don't have children, so I can spend an hour a day looking up things and just like randomly clicking on tracks and finding music that I like. So I'm not like one of those people who like I stopped listening to music when I was 20 and I'm just like
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I got all my interests. I'm done. Um, but this is the thing I'm very curious about. I don't know much about New Zealand from. I mean, the most I know is from television or movies. I don't see a lot of TV. I guess Top of the Lake is the only
Yeah.
thing I've really seen that's like. I mean, besides like Lord of the Rings, which is not. I mean, it's set there. It's not.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think New Zealand culture really comes out that much in The Hobbit.
I think no, I think that was I lived in Wellington around the time. So I live in Melbourne now though,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, Lord of the Rings getting filmed in Wellington was a big, big deal. It was like pretty much everyone apart from me was an extra in it at some point. And like yeah, there's big stories around town. Like there's this bar that's so cool that Liv Tyler couldn't even get into it. Like it's very, and saying that New Zealand culture is not very present in The Hobbit. The Hobbit is very present in New Zealand culture. That's what I'm trying to say.
Because like I don't know much about like I mean besides the fact that I mean how long did you live there before you moved to Australia?
So for all my life until I moved to Australia when I was 21, I think 22. Yeah,
So it
and then
basically formed you as a person.
oh yeah, like I'm definitely like and even now like I don't know how familiar you are with the accents, but like I haven't lost my accent at all, and I've been here for probably some 38. So what's that? Nice 18
17.
years, 17 years. Yeah.
Hey, my brain's not that
Yeah,
destroyed if I could do that arithmetic very quickly.
that's good. But yeah, like lots of because I moved over here with friends who I played in a band with at the time, and yeah, so like I would have, and there's lots of New Zealanders in Melbourne especially, and so yeah, I'm definitely from New Zealand for sure.
Yeah. So I know. So then what? Two questions. Well, we'll just start with this. What to you is New Zealand culture? Like, what typifies it for you, or what was it? What was it? If maybe a better way of phrasing it is like when you were growing up. What's the culture in New Zealand that formed you as a person?
Yes, it's difficult for me to comment on what New Zealand's like now because, like I say, I haven't lived there for so long, and I go back occasionally, like usually for shows and stuff, but like I haven't really spent any kind of significant time there
But like
for
when you were
like
growing
a
up.
So yeah, so when I was growing up, I guess I grew up super rural, like proper country, and like the town that I'm from, Taumarunui, people in New Zealand don't even know where it is. Like it's super small. Um, so that was very much like school buses in the country and like a Catholic school with 120 kids and uniforms and um, like my father was a farmer, so like helping or being forced to help dad at the farm and hating it, and like lots of standing on streets waiting for the sheep to go past so you could direct them into a gate and like shit like that. And then because where I grew up was so small, there was like a high school there, and I suspect it was totally fine. But my mum is, had kind of like affectations of being quite posh, I think. So she sent me to boarding school like 2 hours away, and it
Huh.
was like not a fancy boarding school, but like a state boarding school, but still, I guess, a boarding school nonetheless. And yeah, so then I'd like go home maybe like once a month or something. Me and my group of friends at boarding school were really naughty, and so like they used to make the punishment that you had to stay at or that you had to stay at school if you're in trouble, that you couldn't go home for the weekend. But then, like for us, we liked being there so much because we all hated being at home, and so our punishment was we had to go get sent home for the weekend. So I had to go home more than I would like. Um, yeah, just that. Like, I mean, New Zealand is pretty rural overall. Like, I mean, it's so small. Like, even the town where I went to boarding school was probably only like maybe like 30, 50,000 people, maybe like very small. Um, so yeah, kind of, I don't know, New Zealand always seems really claustrophobic to me and quite.
All right. I got 10 questions. I want to pick up
Okay.
with before the internet threw us into a pit. You had talked about going to boarding school,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of curious. Is it like one of those? When I talk to people, I don't know what it is about like the Commonwealth and England and Australia and such, but like it seems like the boarding schools are a lot more strict. What was yours? What was your experience there like?
Yeah, so mine, well, I got expelled, so so it was quite strict. Yeah, I think mine was strange. So it was like I say, it wasn't a private school, it was like a public school. But then, so the school itself was like maybe, I don't know, like 1,500 girls. And then maybe at the boarding part, there was like 150. But like I loved it. I think it's kind of the kind of situation you either. I think if you're probably a loud, confident kid, then you will love it. If you're not, then it would probably be the worst thing that you'd ever been forced to do. Um, but I think also because I hated my home life. So for me, I was just dying to kind of get out of there, which was cool. So I really wanted to be there with my friends and stuff. But yeah, it was super. It was very strict. I remember maybe like 5 years ago or something, or like a while ago anyway. I was looking at. It suddenly occurred to me that I could have a look at it on the internet, and I hadn't like, obviously since I was like a teenager, and I was reading the prospectus, for potential students, and it was like, a fine place for any woman or young woman to blah, 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 something like that, and it kind of made me like roll my eyes because I was like, it absolutely was not that. Like you had to just be exactly a certain type of person, otherwise you were always in trouble. And I don't know, like just like I mean I understand it. Like there's like 150 teenagers under one roof. Like if you slightly deviate from what's considered, good behaviour, then that's pretty frustrating. But no, they were super strict and like they're all kind of like, it wasn't a religious school, but then the woman that ran the boarding part, so this is Hamilton Girls High School in New Zealand, was like some kind of weird religious woman. So she'd got all these friends of her, all the matrons, which is what we call them, were all her kind of friends from church. So they kind of, it was a very strange environment, really. Yeah. I mean, you'd have to be a weirdo to want to do that job. I think that's kind of my opinion on it. Like,
When you say weirdo,
Yeah.
though, you don't mean like weirdo like us. You mean like
Yeah,
religious weirdo.
I just mean like just a bit NQR, like something. Like, why would you want to do? It's just a bizarre job. It would be poorly paid. You had to live on the premises. Like with I don't know.
So you have to really want to indoctrinate people.
Well, they didn't put. When I say that they were kind of strange religious people, they definitely didn't push any of the, like, it was just kind of not known to everyone that that's how they knew each other. We all knew that they were quite religious, but yeah, it was like I said, it was a state school, so there was no kind of room for them to kind of push any religious agenda. But they were just oddballs, like very not only would you have to be quite strange to want to do that job, but also these were people that were quite uniquely unsuited to the job as well. So it was very strange. Yeah.
What made them unsuited?
Just super. Okay, one woman was my nemesis. Was this woman?
Nemesis?
She fucking hated me so much. She called Mrs. Dennis, her name was, and so she got married. Like, she would have probably, okay, so I was 12, so she seemed 50, but she was probably, I don't know, maybe between 35 and 45, 35 and 40, I really couldn't say. And I say this to describe her but not judge her, but she was like massively overweight. She had like and, you know, as kids, like, that's, of course, that's something you latch onto, as something to, you know, make fun of her about or whatever. And she was just like mean as a cut snake, like, and I think because I was quite like, when I say I got expelled, like, I didn't smoke or drink or anything. I started doing that when I left, when I got kicked out, but then we were just always, you know, just a smart ass and like just loud and
yep, I get that
kind of stuff. Yeah, and then so yeah, she really hated me, and then yeah, so she just kind of, and because they weren't very smart, and like me and my group of friends, like, we all thought we were quite clever, and so we'd just kind of run circles around them a bit, and then as punishment they'd wake us up at, you know, 2 a.m. and to put on our uniforms and do aerobics in the games room and or clean the place, or like, you know, and like, yeah, like for punishments you'd have to do chores, and so I just spent my life like fucking washing dishes and fucking picking up rubbish and cleaning toilets and, I don't know, keeping people up in the dorm, so you'd have to come down and like sleep on the pool table. It's just a piece of weird shit. It was very strange. Like, yeah, I don't know. It was funny.
So what got you expelled?
So basically I was just always, every time I tell the story, people don't really believe it. They think it must be something more, but because I was always in trouble, right? So if you were late back from town, you got a black mark, which was like a chore, and if you were late to homework time, you got a black mark, and if you were up after lights out, you got one. And so I was just constantly doing that, and then if you got like X amount of that kind of trouble, then you'd get like this certain type of detention, and if you got X amount of them, then you get the serious one, and then if you got the serious one, and if you got 2 of them in a term or something, you were automatically suspended. And so like, even though I never did anything like particularly naughty, like over the years, like I was always just like, my parents were always getting called up for meetings, and then because strangely I did really well at school, like I was always, because I was smart and whatever, so I was on every like sports team and club and fucking, I don't know, and all the top, like I was brainy at school, and then but always in trouble at the other place, and then yeah, and so basically they were just like, cool, we want Sarah to be expelled because she's been suspended too many times. And then because I loved it and I didn't want to change, and so I kind of was like, oh, please, I'll do anything, I want to stay, because all my friends are there. And so then I got put on this contract that I had to do for a term, and if I did this is when I was probably like 15, and if I did this contract, this is such a boring story, I'm so sorry, but
I'm curious. What's in this contract? Like a legal contract?
So,
I mean, quote unquote legal contract?
Yeah, like I had to sign it and shit, and like I think my parents like witnessed it or whatever, and so it was kind of, they provided it and I had to agree to it, and it was basically every single thing I'd ever done while I was there that annoyed them or that disrupted the place, they had it in this contract that I couldn't do it. Like, for example, so I was always late to breakfast, or just chose not to go, and so like Sarah will be the first person in the breakfast line every morning, or when I, you know, in the dining room or whatever, filling up the water jugs, I'd see my friends and sit down with them and talk to them, or like, you know, just chat to people. So one of the clauses, Sarah is not allowed to fill up the water jugs in the dining room. Like, no bullshit. Or like all this, I had to be in a room by myself, and like I think at that age the bedtime was like 10:30, but because I was always up talking all night, they're like, Sarah has to be in her room at 9, no visitors in her room ever. Just kind of weird shit. And to be honest,
they set you up to fail. They knew that you couldn't. They knew that you would not be able to.
They did, exactly.
to what do you do with a contract? You fulfill a contract. They knew you wouldn't be able to fulfill that, and so they're like,
completely true.
We'll look like we're being benevolent. We'll look like we are giving her a chance, but really we know that we just have to like deal with her for another like month or two.
I know, right? So, like, you're exactly right, but I was fucking determined to do it because I was like, I hated them, but I loved my friends and everything. And then, so I was like, so I lasted like 6 weeks. And to be honest, it was very stressful. And I reckon it was like quite crazy amount of stress to put, you know, when you're a teenager and everything's fucked anyway. And it was quite, just constantly being, like, monitoring every tiny bit of behaviour was like, I remember it being quite intense and like requiring a lot of concentration. And then so they had all these two-way intercoms in there, so they could call you down to the office if you had a phone call or they needed to talk to you or whatever. And so they had mine on all the time in my room so they could hear if I had visitors or anything like that, or like if my friends were there. Yeah, it's psycho.
That's some surveillance state type stuff.
Yeah, and so basically the definitive reason why I got expelled is because my friend Ginny came up to borrow some sneakers from me for like sport or something the next day, and then I remember hearing the intercom click, and I was like, oh fuck, they had it on. And then the one that hated me, Mrs. Dennis, turned up, and she was like, you're expelled. And I was like, fuck. This is really annoying. And I remember just being like, fuck, I've been actually trying quite hard for 6 weeks now. Yeah.
See, they were waiting. They were waiting for it. And that's like you had like the early like Amazon Echo or whatever the Alexa or whatever those things are
it's
in
true.
Your thing. They were constantly listening. It was like the NSA.
But it ended up being quite good because I got kicked out. Then I went in. A girl that I knew at school who I wasn't particularly close with, but her parents had got divorced, and her mum was the poor one and her dad had the money, and so the mum wanted someone to come and live in their beautiful house and like basically get a boarder.
Mm-hmm.
And so then this girl contacted me when I was trying to figure out how, because I could still keep going to the school but I just couldn't live at the boarding part anymore. And so I basically went and lived with her family for like the last 2 years of high school, and like we're still really close, and but because of that I just got into music and stuff because we couldn't do anything at, like, you couldn't go to gigs and stuff at boarding school because we weren't allowed out. But then when I lived with her, like, she went to like hardcore shows and stuff, and so I'd kind of go to those with her and then kind of met people, and then I was in my first band at high school and stuff. And so yeah, I think even though I remember that being fucking stressful at the time, or the getting kicked out, but I feel like I'd probably be like a lawyer or something because I would have just done what all my friends did. I mean, probably I wouldn't. Probably I would have ended up the same. But yeah, it definitely enabled me to kind of do music and stuff like that. Yeah, so good. So thank you, Mrs. Dennis.
I was laughing because my wife was like crawling on her. Like, she's like, I don't want to interrupt this. I was just like, it's okay. You can, Naomi, you can walk through. But yes, again, we're trapped. We've been trapped in this apartment for 321 days together. Not trapped, but like we have to like figure out how to work with the other person there.
What's the so you when you say you're quarantined because you don't legally it's not enforced, is it? Are you just choosing to?
Yes, yeah. We don't want to get COVID, and there's no the government has done nothing. Like absolutely nothing to like stop neither one, either Trump nor Biden. They're not really doing anything. They're not doing anything on the state level. They're not doing anything on the local level. It's just basically like, I don't know, figure it out for yourself, everyone. And we're just like, okay.
So unbelievably fucked. Like, because here when we had lockdown for like maybe 2 months, and then they reopened everything, and then another 3 months, but that was like heavily policed. Like you couldn't leave the house after night, you get a fine if you were out past curfew, and then you're only meant to leave the house for like an hour a day and stuff. But yeah, but they were monitoring that and like finding people if they went to people's houses and you weren't there, then you'd get fines and stuff like that. So
yeah, nothing like that here. It's just like it's basically like Ayn Rand is in charge and is just like, all right, whatever, everyone. But wait, okay, so I want to go back for a second to.
Mm-hmm.
So you get kicked out. You're living with your friend's mom.
Yeah. Oh, and my friend and some other teenagers, because her brother, she had siblings that were all teenagers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is real, but you see this as like kind of like a pivotal moment that like if you had gone to, because I think about that a lot about, you know. Do you think though that like, here, hold on, let me start again because I this is a little bit slightly complicated. It's like, I don't know if you've thought about it, but like I find that there's a lot of like, if you're like kind of a weirdo, or you're inclined to like make things, right? There's going to be a lot of redundancies. Like it took a while for me to finally do this. Like there were a lot of stops and starts of me like trying out other kinds of occupations, or that like I went to grad school or, you know, other kinds of things. And what I could have done that stuff fine, and I would have probably had like a fine life. It just never took. And I always ended, there were so many redundancies pushing me towards making things that I ended up here anyway. And I'm wondering, like, even if you never had this pivotal, that's why this is such a weird question. Cause like, I don't know if you thought about it. Do you really think, I guess what I'm really asking is like, do you really think that if you had like kept going, staying at the boarding school itself, if you didn't have this other, these kind of other things, is there anything that would have pushed you into making music? Or like, I mean, you're also like a visual artist. Is there anything that would have pushed you into that? Or do you think that really was having this like big rupture is really the thing that like pushed you?
I think that, I mean, I always, like I learned piano from when I was like 7, and then, and I always had an interest in art. Like I actually failed out at school, but or maybe that was actually even after getting kicked out. Look, so all the girls that I went to school with who I was super close to, they're all like, I think I'm almost the only one of my close friends that doesn't have a PhD now. Like everyone was super smart, but they were all like, for want of a better word, like, you know, conservative. Like they all, like conservative with a little c, like in terms of, you know, they're all like married with kids now, and but that's not weird now. They were all married and kids with kids in their 20s kind of thing, and like and they've got like pretty, you know, established and well defined kind of careers and things like that. And just because I think that you eventually I would have broken out of whatever because I was always kind of doing my own thing anyway, but it definitely I think I would have come to it for sure, and in terms of like those kind of ruptures or that you're talking about, like, or redundancies was the word you use. I think like I had those quite early, in that I think I dropped out of uni 3 times by the time I was like 19. Paid for it every time though, which is good. But yeah, and so I think probably from 19 I started working in like got my first job in like a cafe or whatever with friends again, and at 20 I started a band with a girl or a woman who's still does music. Like she still does. I don't know if you know the band Twerps from Australia. So that's Julia was the guitarist in that, and now she does her own solo stuff. And so we were friends from high school, and then started a band together when we were 20. And so I think like that's a pretty logical trajectory for me. And you know, I look at Julia, and because we're still close, and I'm quite proud of our trajectories, and that, like, you know, to varying levels of non-success, and you know, like, but still managed to kind of be like our age and still doing it and still love it and enthusiastic. Like her focus is quite different to mine, in that she's always been interested in more kind of I guess like, I don't know, outsidery kind of music than me, or in terms of what she makes, not really in terms of our taste is similar, but her expression of it is different. But yes, I think I would have come to it. I always knew Julia at school. I always thought she was cool. At some point we would have decided that it's easier to get laid if you're in a band, so, which was mainly our motivation. I think maybe in a roundabout way it would have happened for sure.
Did you? Okay, what made? And this is why I started off asking, and I want to get back to it at some point, asking about like the culture in New Zealand, because I find myself, for whatever reason, resistant to American culture. I didn't turn out the way I did because my brain. I also feel like if I was ever in a cult, like if I was ever like part of it, like I would resist it up until the point where they like hit me in the back of the head with a hammer or something. Like my brain, it could be my architecture. I don't know what it is, but I'm set up to resist the not necessarily following a crowd, but kind of. But I think I'm set up to resist whatever, right? Whether it is following a crowd or whether it's just like the omnipresent cultural superego or something like that. It just doesn't. It takes a while to penetrate my my brain. I'm wondering, are you the same? Is that the same thing for you? Do you know why? If so, do you know why you're like that?
I mean, definitely. I think working in opposition to things has come up in like therapy and stuff for me before, for sure. In terms of New Zealand culture, yes, I kind of definitely felt the same growing up. Like it's really sports oriented and like I say, like, and that never really resonated with me. Like lots of altercations every time you went out at night with various people that were drunk, that that kind of stuff. I mean, now when as you get older, you don't feel so head to head with that kind of stuff because you just avoid it. So you just don't go to sports bars. It's fine. Like you don't have to,
right.
But when you're young, you just kind of, I feel like, well, for me, I kind of, for various reasons, found myself in lots of situations like that. In terms of why, I think, I think I'm only going to speak for myself, but I think for me, the things that I don't trust group consensus at all. I don't think there's much, even like I can even be as contrary as I don't even particularly sometimes like ideas of community and stuff like that, even in a what people would see as being like a healthy way, because I don't I don't like it when people get together and everyone agrees on things. I think it's weird. And I think for doing what I do doesn't really map very neatly over what most people do in terms, and I was always aware of that even with school friends and stuff, I don't want to disregard. I've never disregarded any of the hard work that they put in, but I just do think it's easier to walk an established path regardless of the work that you have to put in to do it than it is. There's no rules for, or no kind of framework for necessarily for doing what I do, and I assume for what you do as well. And so I think it's necessary to work in opposition to achieve that, because it's kind of essential to it, really. Like, otherwise. Yeah,
because I was thinking, I was reading about you before we talked, and you talked about being into psychoanalysis in some interview, and I really like that model, because I think a lot about like energy, and I think about like psychoanalysis, or like even any of that stuff like Hegel or any of the like German philosophy stuff is all in some way about like how energy either like in you or in culture is like apportioned out. And do you find like I find that like, because I'm weird or whatever adjective you want to use, that like it takes more energy for me to try to be quote unquote normal. Like, I mean, I'm normal. I'm married. I have a dog. I go to the supermarket. Like, it's not like I'm like, I grow rutabagas in my backyard and that's what I subsist on. Like, I'm fairly like normal otherwise, but just like my, conceptually, I think of things in a weird way. And, I find it takes more energy to like repress that and like, be like, oh, talk about like sports or whatever.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's Yeah, like, I mean, look, I totally agree, and I think probably I mean, that's, if you want to talk about psychoanalysis, I mean, that's repression, right? Like, yeah, that's anxiety, I guess, is what happens when you repress things. You get massive anxiety. So, I think, yeah, I'm also quite interested in the kind of Lacanian thing of like the idea of psychosis and people who are psychotic, how they borrow like idioms and like how it's really hard for them to think, or Lacan would say in the imaginary, but in esoteric terms, like, so they say things like good country people without knowing what it means, or use lots of truisms because they're unable to think of things outside of any kind of like structure. Do you
So it's like,
that kind
so
of make sense?
It's kind of like they're like a hollow shell of culture. They're like just saying the thing, like a stitch in time saves 9 without having any knowledge of the meaning of it, because it's just like some cultural aphorism or whatever, some idiom.
Yeah,
there.
Totally. And so I think not so much being like an empty shell, but it's like you're unable to engage with what people who aren't psychotic do, which is engage in all esoteric and imaginary things or whatever. So like, for example, I think, yeah, like, so engaging with something like religion might be, I mean, all people that engage in religion aren't psychotic, but it could be a psychotic thing because you're basically just unable to see it as anything apart from concrete truth kind of thing, because you've got no ability to see like outside of it. And so like, so yeah, if we're talking about like people who are normal, as in people who don't do kind of esoteric things, like, and is that repression and what's the energy that's being, expended there, like, yeah, like, I think partly it's like, that's why I kind of would consider you to be very normal, and like, someone who I might know from high school, that, or anyone really, like, yeah, if you're not able to kind of engage with things in like a way that is affecting and kind of push out of any kind of existing framework, even if it's in any kind of insignificant way, that I think that's probably like, I'm really interested in the idea of energy as well. Like, I think that's kind of doing creative stuff, like, that's what I've tried to do all the time, is like, if you're talking about redundancies in your life, like, the way that mine probably happen is I always just try and make choices that, because I knew that doing creative stuff would be hard, but just make choices that kind of preserve the energy that I have for it. And like, if that works, if I have energy and enthusiasm for it, then something's kind of going right, and then that's a good choice, I think. Yeah, but
I like that. Do you were you always like this? Is this like something you've come to through therapy?
I'm definitely better. I'm definitely like more. I'm definitely more easily able to articulate and process and think about what I'm doing through therapy. I found I was in treatment for 5 years, and like I kind of did it the bankruptcy proper way of doing it 3 times a week. And I don't really know how, like, I've never got any cash at it, how I made it work, but somehow I think it was just super, super important to me to do it. And yeah, I reckon it was super, like, I'm always going on about it to people, like, it was invaluable to me, like, it really...
Yeah, me too.
So did you do analysis as well?
I did not that... I do talk therapies, and I've been in therapy for 7 years. 7 years now. So, but it's just once a week for me. But it's talk. It is it's not.
That's still a lot though. Like, over that amount of time.
It's Freudian themed, without it being like actual psychoanalysis. It's just more psychoanalysis. I get it more from the philosophy end. I studied philosophy, so I get more from the kind of like conceptual end than the actual like my therapist doesn't actually like talk about these things, except for repression, because I'm American, and so it's a big problem here.
I mean, that's probably, like, I'm pretty critical of other types of, like, first of all, I'm definitely like a whatever works kind of person. So I think if something functions for someone, it doesn't, like, first of all, I would never criticize it to their face, but like, I think. I do get frustrated when people don't acknowledge. You know, like even one of my friends is studying psychology at the moment, and he's in analysis, and he's just shocked at how little Freud comes into it or whatever. And but yeah, I mean, there's definitely criticisms. The point of my story is, I think, in terms of you doing like a Freud, with roots in Freud talk therapy, I think there's definitely lots of criticisms that can accurately be levelled at psychoanalysis, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with if you're into like Deleuze and stuff like that. But then, and so I think probably taking the best bits from it is a super healthy way to do that, I reckon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even really know what it would be like to fully... honestly, again, remember, our health system is terrible. So, like, unless you can find, like, whatever therapist you can afford is basically like where you go, if at all.
Yeah. Well, look, especially if for someone like you, if you've got like a background in like philosophy and stuff, I think that, because to a certain extent, it's all what you can bring to it too, right? So if you have that kind of foundation of knowledge about it, then in yourself, like, you can kind of guide your therapy in a way that you can make it worthwhile for yourself, right? Like, and I think one nice thing about analysis is always that there's like a kind of acquiescence that art and music can function in the same way, and like ultimately you want to get to a point where you're just like kind of doing it in your own life anyway, which I think that's to me one redeeming thing about the fact that it costs $1 trillion. But
I mean, like, you're pretty emotionally honest in your music and your lyrics, and I mean in your voice, like you can hear it when you sing, and I'm wondering, like, was this something you came to through therapy, like you were able to do that, or was it like you said when you said that you were able to like better articulate and better refine, that you've always been pretty emotionally honest with yourself or with others, and that just gave you therapy just gave you the ability to focus it in a certain way?
I think that, so I've always been, so I've been recording and releasing music since I was probably 20, and when I listen to old things, which is, pretty occasionally, but like maybe once every few years, I'll just be curious as to how embarrassing it is, and and it's always quite embarrassing, and then, and I can see, there's the same intention is always there, and that like I can hear and feel what I'm trying to do at 20, 21, 22, whatever. But then I think what the treatment allowed me to do was basically just shift the content, really. I think if I hadn't done the treatment, I would have just been stuck in the first level of, figuring whatever treatment enabled me to move past. That's why it's kind of invaluable to me, because I feel like it's enabled me to progress in terms of content and ideas. And I think that if I hadn't really done that, I think I would have been a 38-year-old person writing about how hard it is to be a teenager, kind of thing, rather than a 38-year-old person writing about what it's like to be 38. Like, it's allowed me to contemporize my content, I think, which is really helpful. And obviously, like, with the practice of going to treatment, like lying on the couch and talking, it has helped me just very easily, or more easily, be able to get into a headspace where I'm kind of connecting with proper thoughts, and it always encourages you not to park your brain or be lazy about the way you think about things, and so that's super helpful as well.
Yeah. So I mean, was there a specific issue that you wanted to deal with, or are you just like, I should probably, all humans should be in therapy? So
I was just always from a child to, like, when I went to, so I'd been in various doing mostly CBT, I assume, but like since I was 17, because always just very depressed. Like, my parents had a really horrible relationship, so I think that was like super kind of scarring for me. And so always had been in and out of psych since I was 17, and then maybe when I was like 30, I remember I think it was like number 8 or number 9 or something. I went and saw a psychologist, and I just finally kind of had a really profound realization that the treatment wasn't working because I wasn't doing it properly. The treatment wasn't working because it wasn't working. The treatment was failing me. I wasn't failing the treatment because I was. When I was younger, you kind of piss around and stuff, but then the older I get, the more seriously I take it, and the more of, the more work I intended to do on it and stuff. And then when it still wasn't working, I kind of realised that it wasn't my fault. And then, a friend was like, you should do analysis, and I had kind of zero information about it. But I think one thing that's kind of always worked in my favour is I'm just quite tenacious, and that's why I kind of always feel bad for people that don't kind of have the energy, because I've always had energy for things. So seeing 8 psychologists wasn't fatiguing enough for me that I wouldn't go see number 9. Do you know what I mean? But for lots of people, one failure is too fatiguing, and I really feel for those people. It's like in saying that my parents were fucked, something went right in the fact that I do have lots of energy and was able to keep trying to do things. Part of me wonders, was it just it's partly energy, but also things were very bad. Like my depression's always been, depression from my anxiety was always super, super bad. I think that also helped push me to keep trying to do things, because in terms of what I was trying to work through, I guess just being kind of locked in a kind of stasis of childhood stuff, and overwhelmingly just being a depressed person, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, is it clinical or situational? Like, was it just because of your parents' relation, of having to be around your parents when you were a child?
Well, I've been on antidepressants maybe 4 or 5 times, but in my teens and 20s, and that never agreed with me. To be fair, I did abuse them. I never really took them the way that you're supposed to, but they never agreed with me. And then, so I mean, I think there's obviously neurology plays into it a lot, but I think. And for me personally, I think a lot of it is hormone, and still is hormonal kind of stuff. But I think for whatever reason, purely by doing talking and unpacking a lot of stuff, that's reduced the overall malaise of the depression and my anxieties a lot better. And it's pretty limited to just being hormonal these days.
Oh, yeah. That's great. That's the really difficult thing. There's stuff about talk therapy where I'm just all right, well, these are the problems. Some of them are irreducible. Fear of death, where I don't know what there's not much I can do about that's. I mean, I could do something about the fear part, but the death part, that's we're not doing anything about that. There's not like a lot of times in therapy, it was just well, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? It's just well, the worst possible thing that could happen is the thing I'm afraid of. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what visualizing is going to do for me.
But some people aren't. Some people aren't terrified of death. So I guess why are you terrified of death?
Well, yes, that's what that's specifically what we're unpacking right now. We're dealing with it at the moment, but I think
also you are in the middle of a pandemic, so that's probably, if you already have that fear, that's probably definitely heightened at this moment. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That sucks.
But I think what I think is interesting is that you were able to kind of what was the process? Did you just talk through and just kind of just unpacking it gave you some kind of peace?
So I'm probably mansplaining psychoanalysis to you and to anyone
please.
that would listen, but I think I kind of don't mind mansplaining it, to be honest, because I feel I think it is. I even had this conversation the other night. We had friends over and stuff, and if I literally. Look, I was a bit stoned, and so I was no, and I clinked my glass, and I was I'm going to do a TED talk about this, because when you're watching people try and find answers to things, but no one gets presented with psychoanalysis or as an option. It's super frustrating to me when you kind of bring it up to people, and one of our friends is like, oh yeah, I know Freud. And I was like, yeah, psychoanalysis. She's like, what psychoanalysis is? I was like, no, everyone thinks that because it's like Einstein or like, that kind of character. Everyone thinks they know what it is.
He's got the white hair. Einstein. I get it. I get relativity.
It's true. It's exactly the same. Or like cocaine for Freud or whatever. Or like he's a sexist. And it's like fucking hell. Like, and it bugs me because it's just such a helpful. It potentially could be such a helpful tool. And the way that I came to it, like. If my friend hadn't said it to me, then I would never have done it, and I literally don't think I would be alive anymore. So it's kind of like, so that's a long-winded way of explaining why I don't mind mansplaining psychoanalysis to you. But yeah, so basically the process is, so from my experience, obviously different to other kind of contemporary talking therapies because they don't guide you. It's less suggestive, so they don't. So you saying that your psych or therapist might be like, what's the worst thing that you can think of happening? Like an analyst would not say that. Like they'd kind of, and I think that's why the process is so much why people, generally, and obviously not in your case, but like generally people see their analysis takes years and years, whereas with CBT you'd see 6 months concentrated and then just maybe go back when you feel like it or whatever. But I think the mentality behind it, or I guess the theory behind it is that sometimes people liken CBT closer to hypnosis than to therapy because it's so suggestive that you leave feeling like, oh wow, that was an amazing breakthrough, but then it wears off really quickly. But whereas with analysis, you do it for such a long period of time that when you finally have the moment when you are able to articulate things, it actually has quite a profound resonance and it affects actual change in yourself. And like there's like a thing that analysts always say that when a patient finally kind of has a realization, they always say, I think I've always known this, and it's not the knowledge of it, it's the expression of it, and being finally able to express it that kind of affects change kind of thing. Yeah, so it's basically just that, like basically you just, like similar to all, like you got to get to know your psych and stuff, and I think really orthodox analysts don't do that, like they don't say anything, and kind of as I got more, because I did a lot of reading and stuff around it because I was really interested in it and went to lots of kind of seminars and stuff like that, and then when I kind of realised that I knew lots about my analyst, like we'd always have a chat before I lay down on the couch, and I know about her kids and I knew about her husband, I knew like how old her children were and her background and stuff, and then when I realised that the stereotype is just the austere silent analyst and the Woody Allen style, then I kind of asked her, I was like, why did you, like we talk quite a lot, and because it does affect your treatment, because for me when I became friendly with her, then my day-to-day pathology of withholding stuff from friends would creep into treatment, do you know what I mean? And so then so our overfamiliarity kind of worked against itself, and then but then you have to unpack that, and then but then that in itself, like, and then she said to me that she just knew that if she had been kind of aloof with me, then I wouldn't have come back, and that's totally true. Like I really need that kind of personal attachment or whatever, and then that causes unpacking of like, why do I, so it kind of just feeds into itself a lot in those kind of ways. But it's super interesting. Like I don't know, I feel. And sometimes I feel quite punishing talking about it all the time, but then in the same breath I do think it is like a very interesting, even down to like, people are like, well, it's really expensive, and, but then things like, well, you're wearing $300 jeans. Do you know what I mean? Like, or like even how Freud had more success when he charged even like $1, because then there's impetus to stop treatment, as opposed to if it was free, then you just kind of go forever, and so you kind of want it to finish, so you work harder, and it's, I don't know, lots of things are super interesting about it, I think.
Because I mean, I'm just thinking about like, okay, when you were younger, so your parents, not a great relationship. I mean, was it always a bad relationship, or did it grow to become a bad relationship?
No, it was always a bad relationship so my dad died maybe 5 years ago now, and my mum left him 3 months before he died, which was quite unusual after however many years of a terrible relationship. But always quite bad. So I think that was quite, a lot of my issues, if not all.
Yeah,
I'd say high 90% come from that kind of stuff. Yeah.
But I was also going to say, like, you have that as this kind of like baseline for you, and then you're also you go away to school, and you also have problems dealing with the teachers there, and then you kind of like get kicked out there, like, and so like I'm just trying to think of like, obviously like having that lack of stability when you're younger is probably like causes a lot of these problems.
I mean, definitely, and like that kind of, because then when I got kicked out, I started like, so the family that I live with, like lovely family, like I say, I'm still friends with Chloe, the daughter, like she's the same age as me, but then the mum, in retrospect, was really depressed because she'd just gone through a divorce, whatever, like, so she was kind of just
Right.
like a shape under the bed clothes most, like when she wasn't at work kind of thing. And like as kids, because I only would have been like 15 I think I was 15 when I moved in there, so we didn't know that was what really was going on. But then she got a boyfriend that lived like 2 hours away in New Zealand, so every weekend she would go, and so in the house it was me and Chloe, and we were 15 and 16, and then her brother who was 15, his friend who moved in who was 15, and then eventually another really good friend of ours got kicked out of his school, and so he came and lived in this big house, and so every weekend it was just like these 5 teenagers, and so then we just started drinking heaps all the time, and so then that kind of with the instability, and then like because alcohol's always been a big problem for me, and then and then like so then I've probably lived in like my boyfriend now, Simon, like I think even talking to someone who hasn't moved around heaps, he's probably lived in like 5 houses or something, and I literally couldn't even tell you, probably like maybe 25 or more, like just always moving around, like lived in 3 or 4 different countries, and lots of so like instability's been a big constant really for me. Like I don't really even, there were times when I thought it was kind of like loomed a bit larger in my psyche, but now I kind of don't really pay it much thought just because it's quite normal really.
Yeah,
like I've probably had like 70 jobs, like no bullshit. I think I counted up like maybe 5 years ago, and it was them. I'm counting ones that I even did like one day at or whatever, but like even that in itself is ridiculous to me. Yeah.
do you think, I mean, this is very reductive, so take it with a grain of salt, but do you think like creating things has given you some stability, like writing music or making art?
No, definitely, I'd agree with that. Like even when you were talking about the redundancies in your life and how it took you time to get to where you are, I think it did occur to me that I kind of got those redundancies out of the way by the time I was 20. So kind of since then I have been pretty single-minded about, like I've always just, with a couple of exceptions, basically just worked as a chef and done music and made choices to make it possible for me to record records and be around people that do music, and so it's kind of been pretty focused, and so in that way it has definitely been a huge constant for me really. Like when I was younger I wanted obviously to be famous like everyone wants to when they're like 20, but then as the older I've got, and like my focus is on just making really kind of realised work at the moment, just for like visually, and less so I kind of take the art stuff a little bit less seriously, but I just want to kind of do very good work that does what I want it to do, as opposed to kind of any other achievement, which I suppose is that's just a rational reaction to I guess not being able to make heaps of money from creative stuff, so you kind of got to get some joy out of it.
Well, I mean, look, I've met famous people. Living in Los Angeles, I am near them a lot, and it does not look not only fun. Like, okay, if we're talking about energy and things like that, the amount of energy the more famous you get, I think about people like this. Fame is like a panopticon, all right? And the more famous you get, the more you're in the panopticon, and the more the more people are thinking about you all the time. And then you have to live. Your life is in the panopticon. You can't like Ben Affleck. I've seen pictures online in the past week or two of like him like getting Dunkin' Donuts all the time, and like you have to have someone's constantly doing stuff like that or thinking about you, and I think that warps your brain. And if you want to continue to make good things, or you want to continue to make, let's say, honest things, if good is maybe a little too nebulous as an adjective.
Yeah.
If you want to continue to make honest things, you have to devote a lot of energy towards that. And I think there's like a sweet spot. I think there's a sweet spot of like you have an audience and there are people that like your work and you can make some kind of living from it before you cross this like this threshold where you're thrown into the panopticon and it warps your brain.
Interesting, right? I mean, in terms of what you're saying about like, mate, yeah, I mean, I always use the word realized, I guess, because to me that kind of grasps ideas like good and honesty and things, and just kind of just makes it sound like there's a clear line from head to outside kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it realized always sounds really exhaustive to me, like you've really like wrung whatever you wanted to wring out of something, you've done that. And so yeah, to kind of do that, I think that's partly why I keep it pretty streamlined in terms of who's involved, not in a choosy way, but just it's easier for me to be more focused and do that to expend that energy if it's just like pretty slim. And so in terms of the panopticon, that probably wouldn't suit me very much to be polluted kind of by that, for sure.
Yeah. By the way, when I said honest, I meant like I didn't necessarily like you are honest and artful, as opposed to like, you know, the difference between your music and like a live journal. It's just like someone spilling their guts at like I meant honest, like you like it comes from a real place as opposed to I mean, look, this is my theory, whether so again, take it with a grain of salt, but I think that that good, what I'm calling good in quotes again, this nebulous term, is if it is a function of your real inner life, as opposed to like when I see bad things, it's usually is it's like very artificial. It feels like it's not coming from a real place in a person. It feels like it's someone either like pandering or someone trying to make an approximation of what they think is like a real work, or they're not being honest with themselves, and so it comes out in this like twisted, crooked way. And so when I say good, I mean it comes from a real place in you, and you've obviously like you're an artist, right? You obviously make it artful, but it's still honest. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think like I'm always interested in in my psych always used the word framework, but like what gives people the ability, you know, because some people don't have that capacity or whatever, or some people don't utilize that capacity, or some people are unable to utilize that capacity. And so I guess I'm always very interested in not so much, I mean, I guess equal parts like what makes me have it, but also what makes other people not have it. And yeah, I mean, that's also, I mean, part of that's also just like by virtue of realizing that, you know, teenage aims are not only unachievable, but are quite silly and aren't very appealing anymore. And so then I guess kind of reframing that to have some kind of motivation, and the motivation being wanting to achieve what you're talking about and like get closer and closer to that point where you're able to create something that's like fully formed and contains lots of things and lots of different ideas. And so
also teenage aims are like, I think about I'm like it's if you are 38 and you are still chasing whatever you wanted when you were 15, that's troublesome.
Do people? Surely there's lots of that going on.
Well, I mean, look, America is like the land of stunted growth. America is like, so like it actually takes energy to fight against that, and not like, and like purposely do things that don't fall into. Sorry, I was like trying to come up with a way to describe it. I'll just tell you, like especially like Twitter. In my industry, right? People brag on it all the time. They talk about the things they've gotten, and they'll post like there's an industry publication called Deadline, and like it's a thing you're supposed to post when they write about you in Deadline. You're supposed to post the article, and I actively fight against that, and I don't brag about like whatever things I'm doing on. I'll promote it so that people see what I'm doing, but like I try to fight against that, and it actually takes energy to like be. But also, I'll be honest, there's a little bit of like, well, I'm better.
I'm like that as well. Like it seems altruistic, but it is only in part.
Part. Look, I'm saying it's maybe 50-50. I don't know what the percentage is, but like part
it's
of
kind
it
of. I always find. I mean, this is totally not a hot take at all, but I find it super sad about America. The fact that it's always, that the aspirational part of it is also what is the worst, or what is becoming clearer and clearer as decades go on, the part that's kind of destroying it, which is, I don't know, it's interesting. Like, like in the 90s, like people didn't like America, and people thought, I remember my parents being like, American TV shows are rubbish or whatever. New Zealand's very English and Australia is super American, so it's kind of like in New Zealand, you look to England, well, white people do, obviously. My dad's Māori, like Indigenous New Zealand, and my mum's white, so I kind of had half and half, but mum's family always thought England was like the motherland or whatever, in like a really lame way. But I always really liked America, even when everyone was like, the climate was that it was like a bad place, and I was always just big and unwieldy and kind of obscene, and like I always really liked that about it. So it's kind of sad to see people like you now who are fucking trapped in your house. Like, what the hell?
We're at the right at the end. But wait, is New Zealand as racist as Australia?
It's again, like my information's a bit out of date because I haven't spent any kind of significant time there in so long. But I think it's different. Like, I remember talking to an old landlord I had actually in Australia, like because I referred to myself as being half caste, which in New Zealand, like you say, if you're half of one, half of that, that's like totally normal. I don't know if it is now, but when I was growing up, it was definitely a normal thing to say. Mm-hmm. And so the landlord that I had worked in Indigenous affairs in Australia, and he was like, oh, like visibly flinched. He's like, no, you don't say that here. And I was like, oh, and I asked him, and I was like, why? And he said, oh, because there was all the stolen generation stuff in Australia, and so the idea of being like pure blood or whatever is super more fraught here. In New Zealand there's lots of like interracial couples and things like quite earlier on, but in Australia that was always super segregated. So in New Zealand it's more normal for people to be mixed race or whatever. And then and he said he thought primarily the difference, and this is again not a hot take, but between Australia and New Zealand was that in New Zealand, even if it's kind of, and it is deeply racist in the same way that kind of the world is, but there's always been an acknowledgement that the land was taken because there was a treaty. So even though the treaty was super unfair and they got super ripped off or whatever, there was always a sense of they bought the land as opposed to just, but whereas in Australia there's never really been any, a significant acknowledgement of that. So it's always, I think, and that always seemed to make quite a lot of sense to me. Like both places being racist, but in New Zealand there's kind of a veneer of it being a bit above board,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like in America, I've thought that one of the things that like is really stunting us is that we will give lip service to the fact that like the country is founded on genocide and slavery, but we don't act, but we repress that and repressing. One of the reasons why America is probably so insane is because it's talking about like going back to psychoanalysis, is because all that is repressed, and then it comes out, the energy comes out in like really strange ways. But it seems like it's a lot more healthy in New Zealand.
I mean, it's hard to compare. Like, I remember because New Zealand's so manageable in terms of size and population. Do you know what I mean? It's super small. Like, I remember when I toured America once, when I was in a band, like in my 20s, and we drove across the top, like flew into New York and flew out of LA. And I remember being in the like everyone talked to, I had never been before, and like being in the Midwest, and people in like certain states, like I remember being blown away by the fact that people didn't have passports. I was just like, what the hell, like that's crazy. And then people asking us about New York and stuff, and being like, what's, as though in the way that if you're from New Zealand you talk about America almost, you know what I mean? So I think America's so massive that it's just, I don't know, like hard to compare the, like it doesn't take things long to infiltrate New Zealand, like to my memory, you know, like it's very easy to become like relatively well known, or like like it just has to, the energy just has to span so much more of a small area that I think it's that probably helps it a lot, like
and that probably what makes you have some kind of feel like what's the word I'm looking for, consonance, something like that with the UK, with England, because England's the same kind of way, right? It's so small, whereas Australia is this larger, has that kind of consonance with America, because it has that, and it takes a while for something to kind of penetrate the public consciousness.
Yeah, totally. I think Australia is kind of unique again in that, you know, there's those 5 main centres that are just like scattered around the outside, like, and mostly in like one little bit, and then the rest. It's super weird. Like, I feel like New Zealand sometimes, and I feel like, not out of line saying this, I think it sometimes gets a bit of a, you know, I can't help but, as much as it's super good how they acknowledge like multicultural and things like that, like I can't help but kind of slightly cynically view all the bilingual stuff at the airport when you arrive and that kind of stuff, because, you know, yes, it's amazing that they do that, but then also New Zealand struggles to have an identity, and I think it could also just be like a cash grab for tourists. I don't know.
No, I mean, that's what a lot of it is now. Like in America, especially like identity politics has become just another another bucket that kind of like the wealthy can just stick their hands into, and then figure out ways to like corporations are like, we stand with Black Lives Matter. It's like, you made your fortune, you're cotton, you made your fortune off of plantations in the 1800s. What are you talking about?
It does blow my mind though, like it's, I mean, again, I feel like I'm just like talking fucking beginner level politics, but just the fact that which I definitely am, but the fact that, you know, America does have that like insane like relatively recent history, that I feel like it's fully not surprising that it's precarious, you know, like there's lots of like I don't know, lots of shit going on that isn't getting addressed. That's my opinion. Lots of shit going on.
It's a good pull quote. Sarah, thanks for joining me today.
No worries, so nice to talk to you.
This was wonderful. And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh bye, oh bye, oh bye, oh bye, oh bye, oh bye.